Hey Cozie Homies! Welcome back to The Zone. Today, I'm so happy to finally share with you a book review for Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Harari. And this video is a long time coming. I took over 2 months just to actually finish reading and digest this book. It took me 1 whole month to actually consolidate my notes and write them nicely to make it easy for me to present. And yeah, it's really one of the most tedious projects I've ever done, so stay tuned and watch the whole video. Okay, I would like to say that I feel like there's a lot of benefits that we can gain from understanding the contents of this book, because ultimately this book is really sharing about the history and the progression of our humankind, of Homo sapiens, how far we came as a species and things like this. And it's actually quite a while, right? Even though the book says it's a brief history, right? It's really not brief at all. It spans millions and thousands of years, right? Yeah, it's just a lot of content to understand and to dissect and to appreciate. For this video, I specifically wrote notes for it, and it's quite colorful. You can take a look. It's lots of pages and annotations and all sorts of content inside. So if you all want to see the actual notes that I've written, please do follow me on the Cozie Zone on Instagram, and I'll post all these notes on Instagram. But for YouTube, I'll just briefly go through some of the main points that I think are very important for us to understand. A lot of you might be wondering, why should I watch this video? Honestly, I would say, as human beings, I think we ought to know how we came to where we are at this current stage in our lives right now. Just 100 years ago, life is so different for our entire species worldwide. And even a further 100 years ago, everything is so much different. And I feel like it is important for us to look at how things have changed, and from there on we can understand why society works this way, why we have certain tendencies and certain inclinations to how we do things. Because a lot of these are deep-seated and deeply rooted into the old traditions, the old cultures, and the many influences that we had from many years ago. And yeah, I think without further ado, I'm gonna start to talk about the entire overview of this book. For this book, it is actually categorized into a few sections, and they kind of follow the general progression of humanity. So firstly, they start off with the cognitive revolution, followed by the agricultural revolution, the scientific revolution, as well as the industrial revolution. The cognitive revolution, is actually when we humans kind of differentiate ourselves from normal apes and monkeys and the so-called animals that we know of back in the days. And because of certain tiny little biological evolutionary pop-ups, I guess, humans kind of diverted from the main branch of apes and monkeys, and we kind of have our own species situation going on. And after that, we go on to the agricultural revolution. That's where society starts to form, and communities start to emerge. And from there on, we just go on and on and on until where we are today. Okay, so let me talk about the main themes and arguments that the author brought out in this book. The very first most important theme that he talked about a lot here, is actually the idea of imagined order. And it's because of how humans, we kind of have many imaginary structures in our society that actually causes us to be able to proceed and continue as this species, and for our continuous survival as the human race. And yeah, we'll talk more about it later. And also, he touched a lot about something called the unification of mankind, where he believes that actually ultimately all directions of history point towards unification. So the general trend of how history progresses, is that human cultures tend to merge and unify together, and eventually it would even reach a singularity where the entire global population is one big global community. So yeah, we'll talk more about it later. And the final main argument he brought out is actually all the tiny different impacts that each of these revolutions brought about, and how they escalate and snowball into something much bigger. For the cognitive revolution, we are going to talk about the physical aspects and societal aspects that make us humans different from our fellow apes and monkeys family. Okay, for the physical aspect, two aspects of how we are different from normal apes is that firstly, we have a pretty jumbo brain. We have a pretty big brain. And we have one of the biggest brains in the animal kingdom, if I recall correctly. And One thing about having a big brain, right, is that using a brain requires a lot of energy. So all the food and nutrients that you take in, right, if I recall correctly, I think around 25% or 20% of the total energy converted in your digestive system is actually being used up by the brain to process and think through all the things we need to think about in life. And because of how, right, our big brain became like a big drain, right, we have the tendency to save energy. And this entire concept of like conserving energy is actually a very important basis of how humans come up with improvements and like technological advancements, only because we tend to like to conserve energy. And following that, also humans, we are one of the few animals that can successfully like walk upright on two legs. This is very interesting because being able to walk on two legs gives us a biological advantage, which is that we can actually do intricate tasks with our hands. So like when we free up our legs, we have our hands, and with hands you can create tools, you can create wonders basically. And the problem with this, right, is that because we can do more things with our hands and we work on our two legs, plus we have a big brain, right, it kind of throws off the balance of our entire like symmetry, our anatomy. That's why for humans, right, it's quite difficult for us to balance our big head upright. And because of this, humans have this history of like chronic like back pain, neck aches, and like a lot of these kind of problems because of our posture and because of how we have this big head that we need to take care of. So yeah, it's actually quite an interesting fact that I'd like to share with all of you lah. So this is what I found out when I was reading the book. Because of this jumbo brain and this walking upright situation that we humans are in, right, it makes us much weaker in terms of a species. So evolution, right, will actually favor those who are capable of forming strong social ties, because having a very weak body, having this kind of like biological like disadvantages to our bodies, right, being able to come together as a community, as a group, will really help propel our species forward Like this is really about strength in numbers. Like having like your friends, having a community that comes together, right, it's easier to ward off your predators and like protect each other through like harsh climate conditions or like many different kind of unexpected situations that could have happened in the past in the natural world. This is also another very important progression in our history of humanity, because being able to form social ties and being sociable, right, is actually one of the key defining features of what makes us human. Also, because of how we have all these like weaknesses, right, in our biological bodies and stuff like this, children need more caretaking time. Like among all the animals in the animal kingdom, right, human babies actually require like the most effort and the most time to actually develop and mature into adults, as compared to like other kind of animals who the mom can literally just give birth to the babies and let them just flourish in the wild without much supervision. And because humans of our weaker and more vulnerable physical states, right, we tend to put in a lot of effort to take care of our children and require more time to mature. So this allows them to be educated and they can socialize with each other to a greater extent, which kind of like pays back the limitations that we humans have and we have to face. And as for societal aspects, humans manage to domesticate fire and also make tools. So these two are very important advantages that we have, because we have our hands, we have a creative mind, I guess, we can think a bit more ahead of other animals, and being able to domesticate fire gives us the ability to cook our food, and also making tools allow us to do hunting. So all of this human history progressions and whatever we can think of, right, actually originates from very minute, intricate details like how can I compete for food with other predators around me? How can I get more food? How to feed my children? So yeah, it really stems from all these very basic, fundamental human needs that actually really, after thousands and millions of years, right, we really see how this really snowballs into like the many effects we have in our lives right now. Okay, so another societal aspect that we humans have that makes us unique, right, is that we are able to harness the power of language. So being able to connect limited number of sounds to form infinite number of sentences, that is something that most animals cannot do. So animals, they communicate with each other with like dogs barking or like birds chirping and things like this, right? It's very like basic limited numbers of sounds, and the amount of information that they can transmit is probably very limited and only reserved for the most important information, like oh, predator on the right, run, or like oh, don't go for that food, it's a trap, or something like this. It's like very fundamental and basic communication details that they can put forth. As compared to humans, we are able to use this limited number of sounds and noises that our mouths can create, and we turn it into an infinite number of sentences and phrases they can communicate way much more like information and knowledge that can be transmitted to more people. It also evolved as a way of gossiping. Like humans are the only animals that can gossip, which is quite interesting. And being able to gossip, right, actually helps us to socialize. And as I explained earlier, being able to socialize is a very important evolutionary advantage that we have. And so for us to socialize, talking about fiction is also another key turning point in our human history. So talking about fiction, right, it allows us to create this imagined reality, and having this extra like topics to talk about, right, actually helps us to socialize even more. You know, like if you talk about only facts, right, it's like you kind of run out of things to say, I guess. But if we are able to imagine, say, oh, you know, what if this thing happens? What if there's another possibility? I think it really opens up a whole new world of like topics to talk about. And you know, more things to talk about, the more you're able to socialize. So I think we can see a pattern and a trend coming from here. The thing about what happens after this cognitive revolution, right, is that actually the cultural evolution for humans take place much faster than the biological evolution for us. So basically the cultural aspect of our evolution just over exceeds it really speeds up the progression of our entire human race. And if we only follow the biological aspect without having any of these tiny little turning points, right, it will take us much longer for us to achieve the amount of intelligence that we have right now. So next, let's just go to the agricultural revolution. So this agricultural revolution, right, like many people think it's a very big breaking point, a breakthrough in our entire human history, which I agree, because you know, being able to domesticate plants and like having a stable food source, right, is really something that is quite idealistic, I guess. You know, having the stable food source, and you don't have to really hunt for food, and you're able to just get food all year round. But the thing is, right, Harari in this book, he brought out a lot of like the disadvantages and downsides of the agricultural revolution that I've never ever thought of. He argued that, right, these plants domesticated Homo sapiens rather than vice versa. So it's like, it's more of like how, because of how we plant certain plants and crops, right, we are kind of like being fixated in this particular plot of land, and this actually brought us a lot of disadvantages. So first and foremost, right, our bodies are not evolved for such tasks, because all along humans, we are like hunter-gatherers, we are like foragers. We go around hunting for animals, we run around a lot, we move around a lot, we migrate around the entire continent basically. Also, a diet based on cereal is actually poor in minerals and nutrients, because as like hunter-gatherers, right, during the cognitive revolution phase, we eat a lot of random things like the rabbit meat or like berries and mushrooms and all sorts of very weird kind of like food sources. But after we start to domesticate certain crops, right, we focus a lot on eating them for like carbohydrates to keep ourselves energized throughout the day. And as such, we develop a diet based on cereal, and this actually kind of like depletes us, and it kind of like blocks off a lot of nutrients intake for humans. And I think, you know, having all these certain nutrients taken out of our lives, right, perhaps evolution for us biologically took a different turning point also, because if we lack certain nutrients, our body will find ways to overcome this lack of nutrients, and it will find different ways to carry out its biological functions effectively. And also, there's no economic security to having this agricultural society, because, right, we make money out of very, very limited plant sources. We always plant like certain crops in this plot of land, that plot of land. But what if you face like droughts, or you face like locusts like eating and damaging your crops? Then you have no harvest for the whole year, and you're going to starve to death. You're not able to sell your crops and earn money, and it's actually quite devastating. So we really have to depend our livelihood on the weather, on the natural environment, rather than, you know, hunting for animals, right? Because no matter where you go, as long as the hunting skills are on point, you're still able to get something home to eat. So this is another disadvantage that agriculture actually brought to humankind. The biggest societal change we have is we changed from a foraging band to a fixed villages. And having fixed villages, right, humans will start to like gather plots of land together to harvest crops together, and we are able to protect this precious property together. And this puts a lot more resources at stake, because, right, we are like gathering a lot of our resources at base, you know, like how there's a castle and all the riches are all like accumulated in this one room, and many enemies will want to like find ways to attack and get whatever they can to profit themselves. Before that, like fighting between communities isn't very common, but after we have things to fight for, after we know where resources are being accumulated and stockpiled, we have something to fight for. And because of this, right, wars start to emerge and like battles between villagers and tribes start to happen. Okay, so in essence, right, what he wanted to say, right, is that the agricultural revolution, right, actually keep more people alive, but under worse conditions. So, you know, the human population grew as a result of the revolution, but the living conditions might not actually be as optimistic and might not be as optimal as last time. Yeah. And another very, very important progression that the agricultural revolution like set forward for us, right, is the establishment of the imagined order. We are Homo sapiens, right? We cast off our intimate symbiosis with nature and we sprinted towards greed and alienation. So this is the trend that we took. So rather than feeling like becoming one, merging with the nature, merging with our natural environment, we started to alienate ourselves, we start to be greedy, we start to think of ourselves as like a superior breed of animals and creatures compared to other animals in the natural world. And the catalyst for this like development is actually due to two reasons. One of them is the attachment to my house, and another one is the importance of the future. So these are actually very, very specific issues that can only arise due to agriculture, right? Because we all live in villages, now having ownership of a plot of land, ownership of this village, ownership of your own residence, a house, a home, this kind of gives us like an ownership, and we feel like there's something for us to preserve and to fight for. So we all develop this attachment to whatever we think we are belong to. And also the importance of the future, because you know, in the hunter-gatherers society, we hunt and eat whatever we have on hand. But for agriculture, we need to plan about future harvest. Like, you know how crops and plants have like their own seasons of harvest. So you're like, okay, if I start to put in the seeds, right, in July, I can harvest in December. So they have to really think about it and think of how they're going to like plot out their food intake and their food sources while there is still no harvest from their own plot of land. So because of this, right, the future became a very important concept that humans actually take note, because animals, honestly, animals don't really do like future planning and similar tasks like this. So only humans, we start to see the importance of the future. And because of the attachment to our house and the importance of the future, right, this forms the foundation of large-scale political and social systems. So we have like governments and like the state being emerged, and the concepts of having a governing body coming out of this period of time because of all these resources at stake. And it's good for the human like community to have a leader or like a group of leaders to take charge and control and see over all this day-to-day like transactions, day-to-day livelihoods, and all these kind of little aspects they need to consider. We believe in imagined order because it is not objectively true, but it allows us to cooperate effectively. So imagined orders, right, as we will find out, actually encompasses things like money, empires, religion, and all these kind of like so-called intangible aspects. And honestly, if you think about it, like these kind of items and concepts aren't really necessarily true, but it allows us humans, right, to function properly as a society, as a species, only because we have a common basis of understanding and a common set of myths that we agree to be true, and all of us are able to follow and agree with each other. On top of that, apart from having this imagined order being established, the evolution of communication is also something very important in this era of the agricultural revolution. Because, you know, having an imagined order, right, cannot be replicated biologically in genes. You know, like being able to believe in certain gods, you are not able to transmit this idea through your genes. It has to be transmitted from mouth to mouth, like, you know, oral history. You have to pass through like written script. You have to let the future generations know about this kind of like ideas that the ancestors kind of thought about it and they kind of agree on, so that everyone have a common basis of understanding and a common point of communication when they talk out to each other. We need a conscious effort to keep records of whatever myths that we actually tell people, whatever set of rules and regulations that we tell others. And because we need to keep records, right, we kind of have evolved writing. So like early writing actually was very limited to facts and figures. We only write and record things that really matter the most. And honestly, at that point in time, what matters most is actually keeping track of our harvest, keeping track of economic transactions. You know, like I spend how many coins buying this pack of rice, and like as such, if I sell this pack of rice, how much money can I get it back? So it's like all these are actually the very early things that humans actually write. Another important part of the agricultural revolution is the idea of hierarchies. So a lot of people think of hierarchies as a very outdated idea. It's like always like oppressing people, you are giving only a small groups of people having power and they are able to oppress the majority of the population. But the thing about hierarchies back in those times, right, is that it enables strangers to know how to treat each other without wasting the time and energy, right, to actually become personally acquainted. So this allows like transactions, allows daily interactions to happen much quickly because we all know who to listen to, like we all know what are the rules to follow, and it kind of gives society an order for things to progress rather than having like no rules, rather than having no set of regulations to keep everything in check. Everything will go haywire, especially how agriculture and when people start to sell things on the market, right? If you have no sense of control over what you're selling, what you're doing, many people will find ways to steal and break into your plot of land. They will find ways to actually destroy whatever hard-earned money you get, and it's just a lot of like messy situations that can come out of it. So I feel like hierarchies back in those days kind of helped shape early human societies to enable us to understand and kind of form the idea of a civilization. And next, we are going on to the third main bulk of this book. It's actually just like the biggest bulk of this book, which is the unification of humankind. So as what Harari mentioned, from a vantage point of view, right, history is moving relentlessly towards unity. And there are three possible universal orders that humanity can be merged and combined together with. So first of all, it will be money. No one in this society right now can live without money. I think it is a common fact that all of us can agree on. How money even came about? In one of my previous videos, I did this video called Dollars and Cents, and it kind of like explains to us about the psychology of spending money. And I kind of touched on a bit about the history of how money became a thing in the human society. But to make a quick recap, at first, right, the economic structure that humans actually adopt is the economy of favors and obligations. So it's like okay, I will give you a box of apples in exchange for a box of oranges. I will trade, I'm going to sell you my cow in exchange of 10 bars of gold from you, for example. So there are all these kind of transactions that is really just based on favors and obligations. Because of the rise of cities and villages through the agricultural revolution, right, it brought about new opportunities for humans to specialize in. Having a community and a village allows different people to take up roles and fill up the gaps that society has So maybe our community, we lack people making clothes, and that's where tailors are formed. And our society, we need schools, we need teachers to teach more people how to keep records, and as such, teachers became a profession. So because of all these more specializations in the jobs and careers that humans take, right, it makes the variety of goods and services to be increased drastically. So now rather than just cows and milk and livestock and fruits, right, we have a whole new range of goods and services available in the economy. So we have teaching, we have shoe polishing, we have so many more goods and services. And this increases the difficulty, right, to exchange fairly. So there's no longer a common basis for humans to do exchange with. It's if I teach you for 10 hours, am I really only worth 1 carton of milk? We really need to think through all this, and it was a very complicated and confusing kind of situation that humans have to overcome. And the best compromise we have is to invent money. So we all know, right, that money is actually one of the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. We might not trust each other based on religion, we might not trust each other because of different nationalities, but we all can trust the money. We all agree that this piece of the US dollar note, this piece of renminbi, this piece of the Singapore dollar note, it has value. And honestly, no one can challenge this fact because it has value. This idea of money, right, is very important because humans, if we're able to agree on the value of this so-called maybe gold coins or dollar bills, right, it allows trading to happen. And with trading, it becomes more communication, ideas are able to spread, and that is how eventually humans find its way to so-called conquer the entire planet. Now, the entire planet Earth is really just conquered by humans. Maybe it's because of this kind of tiny little tradings and little transactions that we have between different communities on the basis of money, which allows us to just unify our entire species together. And also, another way of how human societies come together is actually through empires. So, right, to make things clear, let's define what an empire is. So, an empire rules over a significant number of distinct peoples. So, it rules over different groups of people that have very different backgrounds. And this could be in terms of cultural identity that's being different, or it could be because they're in separate territories and they are like bounded by their geographical boundaries. And empires kind of break these barriers, the cultural barriers, the geographical barriers, and bring people together. And on top of that, another aspect of empires is that they have flexible borders and potentially unlimited appetite. We all know the ideas of like empires conquering, colonizing like other countries. We all know they really do have an insatiable appetite. Like no one would ever say like I have too much resources. There are always insufficient raw materials. There's always something for people to fight for, and because of this, the appetite for conquering land, conquering territory, conquering groups of people is never ending. This is actually also one of the reasons for the drastic reduction in human diversity. Because back in those days where like the hunter-gatherer societies, many different tribes, they have their own set of rules and regulations, their own language, their own way of living. But after empires kind of like bring these communities together, there are lesser and lesser like diversification of human types. So like there are lesser distinct communities, and now we really just follow like major groups of ethnic groups of empires. And one thing about empires, right, is that actually sometimes the actual empire itself might not survive, but the imperial culture that's born out of this empire do live on forever. Yeah, it's kind of like how originally it's like people view it as oppression. Like I'm gonna treat you as slaves. I'm gonna just rule over your country and you're gonna do work for me. But eventually, as many years go by, those people that are like enslaved, those people that are being oppressed, they actually found a way to find themselves to adopt and a way to live together with their oppressors. And based on what Harari mentioned, right, there actually this trend of as more and more people of those the subjects are basically more and more of the subjects, when they actually understand the imperial values that the empire holds, and the more of them actually have more knowledge and they're able to interact with their oppressors, right, their leaders, their masters, right, they are actually able to start off revolutions. And a lot of revolutions actually came about on this basis of oppression and freeing themselves from slavery, and fighting for the freedom that they think they deserve. And because of these revolutions and fights and constant battles, right, eventually perhaps even the founding members of the empire, or even the disadvantaged groups of the empire, they no longer matter anymore, because perhaps eventually someone took over the control of the empire. Different cultures, different civilizations, different groups of people take turns to rule over this empire. Eventually the original entity of this empire might not exist anymore, but it is the culture, the literature, the art, the entire ideas and ideologies that these empires used to own live on forever. So I guess this is how human history actually progressed, as we all can see in our current society that we live in now. We are constantly influenced by old ancient imperial values that many people might not agree on back in those days. The third most important point that they're going to bring up for the unification of mankind is actually religion. So the role of religion, right, based on what Harari mentioned, is that it gives superhuman legitimacy to the fragile structures of social orders and hierarchies. Because we all know how social orders and hierarchies, right, it's like an imagined order. These hierarchies are actually rules being set out by humans. They are not actually so-called legit. Basically, biology didn't dictate these kind of laws for us. We humans come up with these laws to govern ourselves and keep everything in check. And because of how fragile all these systems are, right, we have to come out with religion, which gives a superhuman legitimacy to everything that we came up with. And having this added layer of legitimacy, right, more and more people will actually see the value to follow these regulations and these ideologies that are being put out by the forefathers. And as for what religion is being defined, right, it is defined as a system of human laws that is founded on the belief of superhuman laws. And there are some qualities that make religions very special. Is that the religions usually will say that their superhuman order is universal. It is true always and everywhere. It's a very common religious concept that is always being put forth by different religions, is that whatever they say is always true. Whatever they say is the word of God. Everything that they say is actually founded by something greater than human. Another quality of religion actually is that it insists on spreading this belief to everyone. We see so many religious leaders, they are aggressively spending their whole lives, their entire career, just to persuade people to join their community and join their religion. And this is one of the defining features of religion, is that it insists on spreading their knowledge to the world, basically. And because of how insistent they are in spreading knowledge and communicating their ideas and ideologies to different groups of people, these ideas eventually spread around the world, and initially it fosters more interaction between different communities, and as such lead to the unification of the human race. I wrote a lot of notes on the topic of religion because I'm super interested in it. But the thing is, I don't think I will mention it in this video. But if you are interested to see what I talked about for the religion aspect, do head over to my Instagram page. I would actually do some tiny explanations on what the religion chapter talked about in this book. It's really interesting. Maybe let me give you a small teaser. What I learned in this chapter of religion is actually about how religion actually progressed. So religion actually started off as animism, like in the hunter-gatherer society. They believe in animistic spirits. They believe in some animals have spiritual qualities that they respect. Plants have certain qualities they respect. The tree is sacred, the river is sacred, the mountain is sacred. So this is how early religions started off as. And it heads over to polytheism, so the belief in multiple deities, the belief in multiple gods. So this is very prevalent in ancient Greek, ancient Egyptian, ancient Chinese, ancient Indian religions. Even till now, actually they still follow it, like polytheistic religions. From polytheistic religions actually gave rise to monotheistic religions. So monotheistic religions only believe in one god, they believe in one supreme universal order, and this actually derived after polytheism is a thing. So it's relatively newer in terms of our human history. And there's also another lesser known concept called dualism. So they believe in basically two opposing forces of nature. So there's yin and yang, there is like the good and evil, heaven and hell, all these kind of concepts actually being born around the same time as monotheism. There is also something called syncretism, I can't pronounce it, syncretism, where it's actually the notion of humans being able to appreciate and accept different religions at the same time, even though some of the ideologies might be contradictory or opposing to each other. Okay, to see a more detailed explanation of syncretism, I wrote down notes about it, and please head over to my Instagram page and check it out. There is this quote in this book which I think really encompasses everything that I talked about so far, which is that geographical, biological, and economical forces created constraints. Yet these constraints leave ample room for surprising developments which do not seem bound by any deterministic laws. So, for human history, we are bounded by our physical flesh and blood, and also geographical landscapes. We still haven't really developed any ways to so-called cross geographical boundaries very effectively yet, and also economic forces. So because of all these constraints that we have in place, we humans have to find ways about and around these constraints and to progress further as a species. And this is essentially how human history actually progressed. It's like through all these constraints and limitations that we have, we find ways out and essentially conquer the world. We are reaching the more recent developments of human history, which is the scientific revolution. And I feel like the scientific revolution actually explains a lot about how our current modern day society works and functions. Because the scientific revolution, honestly speaking, it really propels human progression insanely. It's just an exponential growth in terms of advancements, in terms of how much knowledge we have and how we actually are able to come up with inventions continuously. The main question we want to ask is how modern science actually differ from traditional knowledge. Knowledge being founded on ancient religions, knowledge being founded on imagined orders based on the word of mouth in those societies earlier on in human history. So how do they differ? One way that modern science differ is that modern science, we are willing to admit ignorance. And being able to admit ignorance is actually one of the biggest breakthroughs in human history. All along in ancient times, we are humans actually, we used to live in the golden age. We know all the answers to the universe. You just need to consult the gods if you are unclear. But being able to admit that we are ignorant over certain phenomena in the universe is actually what drives modern science. Because you all know how the scientific method is being built on the foundation and on the basis of asking questions, coming up with hypotheses, doing experiments to prove your point, and to really see whether is this knowledge, is this theory actually a reality. one way it differs also is that observation and mathematics is central to modern science. So modern science really depends a lot about observation, how you measure certain results, and also mathematics. We do a lot of calculations. We want to make sure that everything is actually being able to be derived with mathematics. Everything is able to be explained coherently and logically with true logic. Modern science is also used to acquire new powers. So we do not learn science just for the sake of learning science, coming up with theories, appreciating ideologies that science offers. It is actually about how we can use this scientific knowledge that we came up with, how can we transform it into our own advantage, and how can we invent ways to circumvent and to find ways to improve our living conditions and to solve issues that we are not able to face back in the days. One thing about the scientific revolution, right, is that it's only until the scientific revolution that most human cultures actually don't believe in progress. As I mentioned before, everyone thinks that the golden age has passed. Everyone thinks that humans, we are deviating more and more from God. We are deviating more and more from the ideal state of the universe. And we have to find our way back to how the world used to be. So this is actually a common ideology that is prevalent throughout the entire ancient human world. And also, right, discovering new knowledge is so-called condemned. We all know the story of the Tower of Babel, when people tried to build this tower to challenge God, and we all know what happened afterwards. Icarus falls. He wanted to build wings and fly to the heavens, but the gods punished him because he's trying to defy God. And ideas like this, so because of all these kind of myths and these kind of beliefs that people actually believe in, right, no one dared to come out with breakthrough progressions, and no one dared to challenge the authority of the religion back in those days. One point for us to note, right, is that science is not an enterprise on some superior moral or spiritual plane. In fact, right, actually, science is actually shaped by economical, political, and religious interests, because we see the power of science in terms of how it can help us with politics, how we can earn more money using science, right? It is the reason why science actually gets a lot of progression. And we all know to do research and development, to find ways to think about making scientific breakthroughs, is a very expensive affair, and that people who fund these projects, right, do believe in advantages and benefits that they can reap from this investment that they do. And as such, this actually propels scientific research and development only because people believe that science can benefit their own personal interests. Also, the conquest of knowledge and the conquest of territory became more and more intertwined. So we all know the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus. It is in fact one of the most foundational events of the scientific revolution. So yeah, this taught Europeans, right, to favor present observations over past traditions and to search for new knowledge at insane speeds. So because after they discovered America, they realized that actually there is a lot of benefits that you can actually get if you're able and you're daring to actually go out and set foot to actually discover new land, discover new territory, learn new knowledge, find out how other cultures actually solve their own societal problems, and how we can use ideas that are invented by other cultures and how we can integrate them into our own culture and our own society, which is actually a way of driving societies forward. If we all bounce off each other's ideas, we bounce off each other's inventions to essentially benefit everyone at the same time. And also, right, because of this development in science, it also leads to a development in the economy. So one of the greatest inventions of the scientific revolution is that we humans believe in fake money, imaginary money, or in economic terms, credits. So it's back in those days, right, transactions only happen when they see hard cash, when they see okay, you owe me this amount of money, you have to pay it back. But in the more recent days, we humans actually were able to believe in spending money of the future, because we all trust in the future, and with this trust, it allows economies to flourish and blossom. So because in the pre-modern economy, right, the people don't really trust in the future, so there's little credits and there's slow economic growth. And for modern economy, right, because we believe and we trust in the future, we are able to have more credits and have fast economic growth. We all know how limited money is, we all know how everyone's short on money, right? But if you're able to invest in a future project, you'll see value in investing in something right now that allows you to gain benefits in years to come. This actually allows society to grow and it allows the economy to develop, because we humans put faith in the future and we put money investing in things that can only appear in the future, right? It allows humans to just have basically use current modern day funds to work for future projects, and this actually just stimulates and propels growth lah. And also, the free market also is a relatively new concept that is being brought out in this period of time. So the free market actually allows the market to adjust itself, and it allows companies to earn profits. It allows companies and firms to employ workers, and the entire society is basically engaged in this free market structure that is relatively new. But the thing about the free market, right, is that it has no protection against fraud, against theft and violence. So we all know instances of people like stealing intellectual property. We all know instances of like people trying to like exploit workers to lower their cost and to like earn profits. So these are actually some of the problems that the free market brought about. And because of this, right, government control is also an important aspect that many countries enforce. Because we all know how it is in trust, right, that money exists. It is because of trust, right, that humans can believe in the future. So governments actually have to enforce legal sanctions, right, and laws against these kind of like dirty tricks, right, in order to ensure trust. So like if a country can see like, oh, this country is actually a very fair state, like there's an equal playing field in terms of the competition, in terms of like making businesses in this market, right, they will see more value. They will be more interested to so-called start a business or to like invest in this community, in this society. And it is important for the governments to ensure this trust. That's why certain government control over the free market might be necessary at times. And the scientific revolution also brought about many like miscellaneous effects. So one of them is actually energy conversion. So we all know traditionally, right, the way society runs is actually based on a lot of muscle power. We have humans plowing the lands, we have like oxes and horses, camels to transport goods and services for us. And all this muscle power comes from food. We need to eat to get power, and food comes from plants, and plants get their energy from the sun, solar energy. So because of this, right, we humans are technically like restricted by the amount of energy that we have on hand to create more wonders. So because everything depends on the sun. So if there's a drought, there's no food, no muscle power, society falls back. But for now, right, the idea that we humans have is that any type of energy can be harnessed if we invent the right machine. And because of this, humans are able to progress much further. So it allows us to invent things like nuclear power that we can derive from atoms, or like the internal combustion engines that runs on petroleum. We find different ways and sources of energy, right, that allows us to basically operate and run more machinery and like to operate to a greater extent for our entire society. This is actually very beneficial for humans because it overcomes the problem of scarcity and raw materials. Like I know like a lot of us when we study economics in school, right, we always say like, oh, scarcity is the central economic problem. Like the entire idea of studying economics stems from the idea of scarcity. But the truth is actually, right, that scarcity is something that humans actually can overcome when they actually find alternative sources of energy. And it's just quite a fascinating idea to me, because we all know like there is some relief in knowing that scarcity might actually be a temporary problem, because the amount of energy that the universe have is infinite. And as long as humans have the brains and the technology, right, to actually harness these energies, we can basically do anything. Like there's no limit to how much energy we can spend anymore, which is quite exciting if you think about it. And to end off this entire video, right, let's talk about a very important topic that many people might actually forget and might actually overlook, and that is happiness. Okay, so to start off this section of happiness, right, let me read to you a quote that Harari mentioned, which I think is very interesting. History can change the external stimuli that causes serotonin to be secreted, yet it does not change the resulting serotonin levels, and hence it cannot make people happier. So we know a lot of people say that, oh, with technological advances, with scientific breakthroughs, humans are happy as a species. But it is not true because of biology. Like the technologies and the different inventions created allows us to feel happy with external stimuli that can be varied, but the amount of serotonin that we humans can produce is still the same. This is really up to our biological evolution. There's nothing we can do about it. So objectively, we humans aren't happier or sadder throughout history Because honestly, our serotonin levels are the same, you know, like the amount of happiness you can feel can't increase or decrease because it is just around this range throughout our species, you know. These are some like food for thought which I think is interesting to share because I feel like Harari went on to a more like philosophical approach when he talked about happiness. Is that he said perhaps happiness is synchronizing one's personal delusions of meaning with the prevailing collective delusions. Because of how he mentioned the entire world, how our entire human society is being functioned, how our entire species, we all run on imagined orders. And perhaps for us to feel happy, it is for us to synchronize these imagined orders and our own personal delusions together. So we all have a common goal to work towards to feel happy. So this is one way of how humans can approach happiness, how we think happiness actually can be achieved. Many people might also like define happiness as liberating ourselves from suffering. To liberate ourselves from suffering, right, is actually by not feeling fleeting pleasure, and we understand the impermanent nature of our feelings and we stop craving them. Like, we need to understand that our emotions, our feelings are fleeting, they're very temporal, they are never long lasting. And we know that we do feel happy sometimes, we do feel sad sometimes, we do feel angry sometimes, but all these emotions are short-lived. And once we are able to see through it, right, we realize that okay, I might feel these emotions right now, but they're just temporary. And being able to know about it, having the knowledge and the control over your emotions could actually be a key of happiness, could be a way of making you feel happy. To properly end off today's discussion, what Harari mentioned is that, so with only a few small changes to our internal brain structure, right, we became from Homo sapiens, right, we Homo sapiens turned from insignificant apes to the master of the world. Which is actually really insane. Like, it's only because of tiny little changes in our brain structure millions of years ago, humans start to think of the world differently, we think of things differently, we come out with many different ideas, and the entire world has changed because of this tiny biological difference. And if there's another small change in our brain, do you think that will actually lead to a second cognitive revolution? This whole cycle of development starts again from ground zero? We never know. I feel like this is a very insane possibility to think of. Like, we are just so prone and so vulnerable to these kind of tiny biological advancements, right, that we humans we can't even predict where our species will go. We have no idea how our entire species will become, like the many millennia, centuries to come. Ultimately, right, the question we all want to ask ourselves is that, what do we want to become? We humans, we come out with so much technological advancements, we unlock in many endless possibilities that are basically unthought of back in those ancient times. And right now, we are not able to predict and think about what is possible in the future anymore. Like many people mention how jobs of the future, like jobs that we might be working right now aren't even created yet because of how fast technology runs. And what do we want to become? I think that's a good question to end off to this discussion. I hope all of you enjoyed today's discussion about human history and how we became as a species. I'm so exhausted right now. It's so interesting to see how everything progressed. And yeah, my throat is dying and I'm just so happy I got to share whatever I've learned from this book. And if you have any questions that you want to ask and you want to clarify, do let me know. And if there's any interesting pointers that you can think about, anything we want to discuss, do comment down in the comment section down below. And also head over to my Instagram page at the Cozie Zone to find out more about the notes I've written and to engage in further discussions if you are interested. And if you enjoyed today's video, do remember to like, share and subscribe, and hope to see you guys in further discussions and further book reviews. Yeah, bye!